All right. Well, welcome. Thank you all for coming out tonight, or rather staying in, just to participate in this forum on zoning for multifamily housing. I'm Valerie Ortiz. I'm the planning director, and with me presenting tonight is Michael Slagle, our land use planner. And then we also have members of our planning board here. So our chair, Lori Clark, Karen Kelleher, Nancy Arsenault, John Colano Romano, and it looks like Meg Costello is just joining us. And then we're also joined by Deb Woods, our voting associate member. Next slide. So tonight we'll be walking through an overview of the state's multifamily housing law, Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3A, otherwise known as MBTA communities. We'll also provide answers to commonly asked questions, describe how community engagement has shaped our draft zoning, and share with you the board's preferred location for the district and a handful of zoning components. So we'll have a few poll questions kind of peppered throughout the presentation, leaving most feedback for the end of the presentation. So we will not be taking questions during the presentation tonight. All right, next slide. All right, so Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3A. Got a quick poll question to start this one off. It's a good test for me just to see if I know how to use this. So the question here should pop up on your screen. Have you participated in the town's Section 3A or MBTA communities process before tonight? So maybe you attended a forum in the fall or in this winter, completed a survey, or anything before tonight, trying to get a sense of if we have any new faces here with us. All right, looks like just about everyone responded. So it looks like most people have already attended some sort of 3A event with us, but we have a few new people, so that's fantastic. Okay, next slide. So we'll start with the purpose of this new law, the purpose of allowing multifamily housing. So we know that to grow and maintain a healthy economy, we need to diversify the housing types that we offer in Stow. So in Massachusetts, every town has been underproducing housing, which has led to our current housing shortage. So this impacts college graduates, young families, grandparents, even people with moderate incomes. Residents are leaving the state at this point. Next slide. So some basics about Section 3A. This is MBTA communities as part of Governor Baker's Economic Development Bond Bill, which was unanimously passed by the state legislature. So it sets requirements for 177 MBTA communities, these towns, to adopt a zoning district that allows multifamily housing by right, meaning without the need for a special permit process or a variance, a waiver, or any other discretionary zoning approval. So each of these types of communities, so there's rapid transit, commuter rail, adjacent community, or adjacent small town, has different requirements. So Stow is considered an adjacent small town due to its proximity to a commuter rail station, its population, and its population density. So in a moment, I'll describe our unique minimum requirement, but the zoning must allow for a density of 15 houses per acre. It must not include age restrictions, and it must be suitable for families. So to respond or to comply with this law, we must create a zoning district and bylaw through town meeting that is of a reasonable size for our town-specific requirements. So we do not need to construct this housing or offer any utility upgrades. This is a requirement simply to have zoning in place. So next slide. So we can include low-cost housing in the zoning district, which will roughly mirror what is required in typical residential developments. Outside of zoning requirements, any housing built through the zoning must meet additional requirements. So um, a few of these additional requirements include the Wetlands Protection Act and local wetland bylaws, well and septic regulations, building and fire codes. And we can't impose requirements that are not generally applicable to other uses. So we can't require multifamily housing to have higher energy standards, for example. So one question that we get a lot is, how does Section 3A relate to Chapter 40B? So 40B is about the creation of affordable housing. 3A is about the creation of multifamily housing. The permitting mechanism is also quite different, as 40Bs allow developers to request waivers from local requirements and proceed through a comprehensive permit process. Whereas any housing created through Section 3A would operate within the zoning parameters. So I also think a key difference here is that through this process, through 3A, the community gets a say in where the development is located. So with 40B, that's really the developer's choice. So here with multifamily housing, we get to create the zoning district. Another question is, does Stow need to provide water and sewer infrastructure? No, Stow will not be responsible for providing water, sewer, or other utilities to a proposed site. Housing developers would need to design projects that work within existing constraints. We know, and the state knows, that while this requirement on Stow is to zone at a specific density, these additional requirements that we've laid out on this slide will influence the actual density of any future construction. So with other existing policies and regulations that are not within the zoning code, we very likely will not see housing constructed at the 15 units an acre. Great. Next slide. So what is multifamily housing? The state offers a somewhat wordy definition of a building with 3 or more residential dwelling units, or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling unit in each building. So put simply, it could be 1 triplex on 1 lot or 2 duplexes on 1 lot. So we've got another poll question for you. If I can find it. So what type of housing do you currently live in? Whether you're in a single family home, a duplex or a triplex, maybe you're coming from an apartment building, a townhouse, another type of rental housing, or something else that I didn't put up here. Just give you all another few moments to respond. This is interesting for us too, just to see how we're reaching different groups too, to let people know about our forums. Okay. So it looks like this pretty well mirrors what the housing stock is in Stow. So most single family homes, and then we have someone in a duplex or triplex, another person in an apartment building. So not much housing diversity in Stow. Okay, so what does multifamily housing look like? Go to the next slide. So it can really look like many different things. We've kind of circled or squared the different options that that relate to the types of housing that may be suitable for Stow. So duplexes, maybe a fourplex, courtyard buildings, cottage courts, townhouses. So this is what we'd call missing middle housing. So this is modest, gentle density housing options. And it's important to note too that our zoning that responds to Section 3A can specify the exact type of housing that we want to allow. So we can say what housing type we would welcome in Stow. And I have one more question. So have you ever lived in multifamily housing? Whether you currently do, and you've already told us this, or previously, or if you haven't, but you want to in the future, or you don't have an interest in it, it's not for you. Sometimes multifamily housing can be very helpful at different stages in life when you might need more support. Maybe after college, I'd raise my hand for that. Okay. So a lot of people have in the past. That's great. And some don't have that interest, and that's also perfectly fine. Okay, next slide. So this is Stow's 3A requirement. So put simply, our requirement is to create a zoning district of at least 10 acres in size that allows housing at a density of 15 units per acre by right. Next slide. So a few things to note here. This is not a building mandate. So zoning does not require housing to be built. Compliance with the state only refers to having zoning in place. The number of units that may be built through this bylaw will depend on many factors, including those well and septic requirements that I mentioned earlier. Um, Property owners within the district do not need to make any changes to their property. The zoning allows additional options only if desired. So this is proposed as an overlay district, meaning that we are adding to options available. So property owners may choose to develop properties at a lower density, maybe through conversion to a duplex or a triplex. This is really the property owner's choice. The town will not be selecting developers or having a hand in constructing homes. The town is not taking any property. We're just adding flexibility. All right, so this is our task at hand. So we'll discuss tonight how we envision making this work for Stow to maximize benefits to the town. Next slide. So what do we mean when we talk about benefits? We know that more housing options means greater access and greater affordability. Multifamily housing can help Stow meet our local needs by allowing the development of additional housing types, supporting the local economy by positioning potential customers near businesses, and we can remain eligible for state funding to advance the town's additional priorities. Next slide. So talking a little bit more about meeting the local housing need. We know that the median home sales price increased by 78% in Stow since 2010. We've heard from residents that they couldn't afford to buy the home they live in if it were on the market today. So multifamily housing could allow college graduates to return to their hometown and rent, or allow young couples to become homeowners. Next slide. So the median household income in Stow is just under $150,000, though there's a big disparity between renter households and ownership households. So a household would need to earn more than $216,000 to afford Stow's median home sales price, which is a full salary more per year than Stow's median income. And the vast majority of housing in Stow is single-family homes. So we could use multifamily zoning to create more housing options at a variety of price points so that older adults can downsize within Stow without having to leave the community they love, or grandparents could, remain close to their grandchildren. Next slide. So we can support the local economy. We know that housing supports job creation. The customer base for businesses in Lower Village is the adjacent residential population. For some businesses, success depends on that foot traffic and repeat customers from nearby businesses or from nearby neighborhoods. And we know that Stow residents want more and better businesses in Lower Village. New residents provide increased revenue for the existing businesses that are there. New residents could start their own business. We've also heard that businesses in walkable communities generate 80% more in sales on average than businesses in car-dependent neighborhoods. And medium and large-sized businesses make decisions about where to locate their shops based on the available workforce and the nearby customer base. Next slide. So more about those state funding opportunities. There are at least six grant funding opportunities through the state that are not eligible for non-compliant communities. And two of these, the MassWorks Infrastructure Program and the Rural Development Fund, have awarded the Planning Department with $1.2 million worth of grants just last year to support transportation projects and strategic planning efforts. So these grants are very important to our work. It's also notable that the governor launched a MBTA Communities Catalyst Fund. So this is available for compliant communities, which is seeded with an initial $15 million in grant funding available to those compliant communities for the purpose of supporting housing and infrastructure projects. Next slide.
All right, thank you, Valerie. As Valerie mentioned, I'm Michael Slagle. I'm the land use planner. I work under Valerie, and I'm going to take everyone just a step back, and we're going to talk a little bit about zoning in general. So, what is zoning? Zoning is our primary tool for regulating land uses and building dimensions on lots. It tells property owners what they can do on their lot, such as building a house, starting a business, building a factory. And it also tells property owners what the look and feel that we want for that property to be. So that would say we want buildings that are this high, this short, we want more parking, some lighting regulations. And towns can really use it to include other things like affordable housing requirements, preserving open space, and things like that. So as I mentioned, this is the primary land use tool that we use here in Massachusetts and in Stow for regulating land. So why does zoning matter? Especially with multifamily housing. We know that housing is the foundation of the community. Without places for people to live, there would be no community here in Stow. And as I mentioned, it regulates what can be built and where it can be built within the town. And that has a big effect on determining who can live in Stow and who is excluded from Stow. And if we use zoning correctly, we have a very powerful tool to advance many different goals that we have. So having good housing policy and zoning can help us with our conservation goals, our transportation goals, and overall diversity and equity goals. A lot of the towns and cities across Massachusetts have very strict zoning, which really makes it impossible to build anything else besides single family houses. And as we know, single family houses right now are not affordable to many families that are looking to buy. And it also excludes people who a single family house might not be their preferred housing option. So using zoning, we can, create the community that we want to see and support those who currently live here and those who want to live here. So Stowe gets its authority to zone under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40A, and this is called the Zoning Act. And the Zoning Act was created, and it gives each town and city certain responsibilities and parameters if it chooses to zone. So Stowe took advantage of that, and we have to follow within some of the parameters that the state gives us. There's certain property uses that the state says towns and cities, you can't regulate this very strictly. So towns, the Zoning Act says towns, you can't prohibit agriculture, you can't prohibit churches, you can't prohibit schools. Those are things that the state views as important and could infringe on other rights that people have. By including Section 3A to Massachusetts General Law 40A, this adds multifamily housing to the list. So the state is saying multifamily housing needs to be allowed in some capacity in the town. So Valerie kind of mentioned a little bit earlier about things that zoning does not regulate. And we have a few things here that are kind of misconceptions about what zoning regulates. So these are additional guardrails that help protect the residents and buildings in Stowe, such as the building code, the sanitary code, which is also called Title V, which regulates drinking water wells and septic systems. And then we also have the Wetland Protection Act, which is the state level protection, and the Stow Wetland Protection Bylaw, which is a little bit more tailored in to fit Stow's needs. So these additional guardrails also regulate the land, but they are kind of separate from zoning. And zoning works alongside these tools in order to ensure a safe environment, balancing our needs, and achieve the goals of the town. So I said what zoning can't regulate with those other regulations, but here are some things that zoning can regulate, such as the location of a zoning district. It's blurred behind me, but you can see the zoning map, which Stowe established. It says these are where certain land uses are going to go. We can regulate what type of multifamily housing we want to see. We can talk about inclusion of subsidized housing for people of lower incomes who make a qualifying income. And there's other things we can regulate too, like the parking requirements for each dwelling unit, the layout of sites, and some of the dimensional requirements of each building on the site. So now we have kind of an idea of what zoning is, and Valerie mentioned some of the benefits. So are there any, I guess we'll launch the poll question now to kind of see which benefits of zoning we really want to see emphasized with our Section 3A district.
I'm gonna give this a little bit of time. The answers are slowly coming in.
We're starting to see a little bit of a mix in responses. Give it just a few more seconds, and we'll close the poll. All right, I guess we can close it now.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see that, sorry. So it looks like the majority of folks, about 53%, were excited about more housing options in Stowe. Second is opportunities for aging in place, and then a tie between supporting the local economy and retaining eligibility for grant funding.
Right. Yeah, those are really great options and things that, I hope that we're able to incorporate into our zoning, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But next, I want to just start off by talking about some of the questions that we have gotten so far that will help kind of explain a little bit more about why we're doing what we're doing. So as we kind of mentioned, this is a state level policy or state level law that has come out, and some towns and some people are asking, what if we choose not to comply? And from what we've seen so far, we've seen that the town of Milton has chosen not to comply with Section 3A, and that has resulted in a lawsuit from the Attorney General. And the outcome of that was that I believe it was the Superior Court ruled that Section 3A is a constitutional law, and it is something that can be enforced by the Attorney General. If Stowe chooses not to comply, we would also be subject to civil enforcement action from the Attorney General for not advancing some of the state fair housing laws and some of the anti-discrimination laws. Valerie mentioned that the planning department, we've collected $1.2 million in grant funding, and grant funding in the future for some of those projects would no longer be in existence. We would have to give some of those funds back. And we really want to emphasize that the planning board is continuing to focus the zoning on maximizing the benefits. So it may not be exactly the direction we wanted to go initially with some of our planning agendas, but this is something that is a tool that we can use to really advance some of these goals and other priorities that exist within the town. Another question that came up was about this idea of an unfunded mandate. Some other towns in the Commonwealth have asked the state auditor if requiring towns to do this zoning effort is considered an unfunded mandate. And the state auditor's office said that it is an unfunded mandate. However, the auditor did not actually do an audit of the law. So it was kind of a putting an answer out without really doing that study before. This opinion of the state auditor has no weight to it necessarily. It has no legal effect on Stow or any of the work that we're doing currently. The attorney general and the governor argued against the state auditor, saying that they don't believe it is an unfunded mandate, as for several different reasons. One being that there is grant funding available for towns that are looking to comply with the law. And every town that has applied for funding has received it. Valerie and I did apply for some funding to help us with some of the compliance work that we're doing. So we're one of those communities that have taken advantage of those funds that are out there. And updating the zoning is a regular function of local government. It's something that the planning board kind of continuously works on. And it's something that, it's part of the planning department's job. Next is talking a little bit more about some of the specific areas in Stow and why we chose to not zone over them. So the questions are, why didn't we put them over the lower village business district or the commercial district? So this is a little bit complex of a question, but from the perspective of the state, only 25% of our district can be in a mixed use district, which would allow both housing and some other non-residential use, such as a store, a cafe, a restaurant, something like that. So if we were to do that, we would have to have a larger area than the minimum requirement. We also want to avoid putting residential uses or allowed uses over non-residential land because it helps diversify our tax base. This can help stabilize the tax burden on everyone and can make property taxes a little bit easier to predict for everyone. We'd also have to allow freestanding residential properties, so that would further reduce the area that new businesses could develop in, which would kind of take away some of our economic development goals. And we'd also not be able to require a special permit for a mixed use development, which would be the typical process that the town goes through, which is a public hearing. And this would really give the power to develop fully to a developer instead of having any discretion from the town itself. We've also gotten a few questions about why town-owned properties aren't used and why we can't use the Stow Acres development to comply with the state. So the state has established lands that are considered compliant for 3A, and town-owned land is not something that currently is considered to be compliant, with the caveat that if you did zone over town-owned land, there would be that expectation from the state that you would have to develop that land at that density allowed. And that would change it from just a zoning update to a building mandate. And that's not necessarily something that the town has expressed interest in doing. And why can't we use the Stow Acres development? We've seen from other towns who've tried to put their zone over recently constructed neighborhoods that are in the permitting phase, and other similar developments, that the state sees that as not actually complying with the law, and instead is just kind of an easy way out that they're not going to let pass. I'll pass this back off to Valerie to talk about some of the impacts.
Sure. So another common question is this going to create a strain on our schools? During a 10-year period between the school years 2012 and the one that ended in 2023, the number of total students enrolled at the Neshoba School District decreased by just over 10%, which signals a decline in the number of young children in Stow. We should note that the enrollment at Minuteman has increased, but the scale is quite different. So we have 56 more students at Minuteman in an 8-year period versus 500 fewer students at Neshoba in a 10-year period. And the state's Massachusetts state aid formula requires or rewards communities with growing enrollment with higher state funding and lower required local contributions. So this chart here is from a recent presentation by the Massachusetts Taxpayers Association, and they were comparing school districts that were either with flat or declining enrollment versus those that increased their enrollment by at least 100 school children or more. So Stow is one of those 201 districts in the study that are in a declining enrollment. And what this chart is intended to show you is that the state aid provided to districts such as Neshoba is far lower than that of the state aid that's provided to only 15 districts with increasing enrollment. And then our required local contribution change is quite higher than that of school districts with a increasing enrollment. So if you're worried about school costs, you really want school enrollment to grow. We've also seen a recent report that showed that school enrollment is more closely tied to turnover of single-family homes rather than the construction of new multifamily housing. Next slide. So what are the fiscal impacts of complying? Rezoning to allow more multifamily homes is typically fiscally net positive for communities. New multifamily homes bring in valuable new tax revenue, while typically requiring fewer costs per resident as compared to single-family homes. And there are few towns that have commissioned economic impact analyses to see what the local impacts of Section 3A zoning would be on their community. And each of these 4 have found that complying would have a positive impact on municipal finances. And towns like Medfield and West Newbury are particularly interesting for us to look at as they are quite similar to Stow. And I should also say that all 4 of those impact analyses are available on the town's website. So if you go to the planning board page, MBTA communities, and then resources, you'll be able to find all of those. And then the Mass Taxpayers Foundation has found that towns with higher population growth have seen slower rises in property taxes than those with lower growth. Next slide. So what does open space mean for private properties? If you're a resident in Stow, you hear people talk about open space all the time. When we talk about it on private properties, we're really referring to those areas that don't have buildings, structures, or driveways on them. So green spaces, gardens, recreational areas, that's really what we're talking about. So basically someone's yard. So this does not relate to the town's purchase of open space. Next slide. So how does this impact wetlands or conservation land? Conservation land cannot be counted toward compliance. And any new housing that is built through this bylaw must comply with all applicable state and local provisions that we've mentioned before. So anything, that as a current resident that you would need to go to the Conservation Commission for, it's the same idea, the same process. So really allowing any developments or up to 15 units an acre is a strategy to house more people while reducing the impacts on natural and working land. So we can't stop growth, but we can guide it to certain areas of town to allow us to continue to conserve contiguous green space elsewhere in town. Slide. Can we control what multifamily housing looks like? Simply put, no, we cannot control the specific design of any multifamily housing. We can call out limited specific components such as the housing type, so whether it's a duplex or triplex, how tall a building is, or how far it's set back from the street. Next slide. So let's take a look at what 15 units per acre looks like in Stow. These are three examples. The left and center show duplexes. The one on the right is a triplex. We should say that these would not be able to be constructed today on such a small acreage because of current well and septic regulations, but there's still images of the housing types that this bylaw is looking to allow. And again, as I mentioned earlier, while these three examples have that density that the law says they're after, the state understands that we likely won't see building at a 15 unit per acre density because Stow has these well and septic requirements that is not true for other towns. So the state has already said that their understanding of this, that we need more room in Stow to be able to create multifamily housing. So we'll show a couple more examples of housing types. We've been asked to take a look at other existing housing developments in Stow and try to see if it looks anything like what we're after for 3A. So this is Baldwin Drive, which is part of Villages at Stow, which is off of Great Road on the west side of town near the former Bose facility. This is 9 units on under an acre of land. So if you were walking by it, the amount of land you can see in this picture is about, again, just under an acre. So we're talking perceived density, not the true density, but what you might perceive as you walk by it. It's about 12.7 units an acre. So that's about what we would get from this new bylaw. However, there are a few caveats here. This is not a great example as this is a 40B development. So this is an affordable housing development, which has vastly different economics than a typical housing development. So their financing is much different. It's also just a small part of a much larger project. So they are on a public water supply. And typically a public water supply, will only be part of a project that has, hundreds of bedrooms in it. So this is still kind of, the full project is at a scale outside of what we're looking at for Section 3A. But we got one more example, I believe. So we'll take a look at Elizabeth Brook Apartments 1. We did not look at Elizabeth Brook Part 2 because the draft bylaw does not include a housing type of a 3-story multifamily complex. So simply looking at the first part of this project, these 2.5-story units, this is 50 units on about 11.5 acres. So if you were to go walk in this neighborhood, the perceived density there is about 14 units per acre. So again, this doesn't consider the new multifamily building as that's not a housing type that the board is currently considering. It's also another 40B. So again, vastly different financing, and it's on a public water supply. So very, very different projects. Okay, so community engagement. What have we done so far? We've been working on this bylaw since last August after the town adopted a revised housing production plan. We held our first information session last August. Through the fall, we worked on locations and getting feedback on those locations through forums and surveys. And then last month, we held another forum on location plus some zoning components that we'll talk about in a moment. So again, the question really is, how can we shape 3A to fit Stow's needs? And while the planning board was working on, on this zoning, we're also taking a look at what residents have said through past planning processes, because we're not starting from scratch. So the vision and the goals here are based on other plans and resident comments. So we know that we're looking to support aging in place and get adequate housing for families, to support housing that's affordable to the local workforce and various incomes, to create New England village-style developments, neighborhoods that are walkable, to protect open space and recreation areas, support economic development, and make sure that we're having an effective use of land. All right, so I'll pass this over to Michael.
Great, thanks. So as Valerie mentioned, we're trying to do an effective use of land in Stowe. So I'll take you through a little bit of the location analysis that we have conducted so far on creating some proposed areas for multifamily housing. So we took four different components, kind of put them through a filter to see what the outcome would be. So we started off with looking at some of the criteria that the state has given us for the land that we can use and some land that we can't use. We also took in a lot of community input through different surveys, through sending out forums, workshops, and engagement with other boards and committees in town. We reviewed some of the plans that the town has produced in the past to see if there are some areas there that are kind of consistent with a call for multifamily housing. And the planning board kind of set some criteria as to look at areas that are should be considered because of some attributes that they have. Once we took all of that information, funneled it out, it gave us three different preliminary districts to consider. And those districts were presented at our February 2025 forum. And that included a presentation from Valerie and I in a few different stations where we asked people kind of what their thoughts are on some of these preliminary areas for consideration, as well as some overviews of some what we would like to see in the zoning. If you want to look at the results of that, we have a summary infographic on the planning board's webpage on the town's website. So you can take a look at that after this forum for some more information. Oh, and I forgot to mention, in addition to that forum, we also launched a survey, kind of an asynchronous version of the forum for those people who weren't able to make it to the in-person event. So sticking on this category of location, we presented three different options: West Stow, East Lower Village, and South Red Acre. And we saw that East Lower Village had about half of the responses as the most favored district of the people who were voting. And the people who participated also kind of had mixed feelings about the preferred number of districts that the town should have, whether there should be multiple smaller ones or one larger one. But ultimately, the planning board took in all of this feedback and is preliminarily proposing the East Lower Village District. So to the left, here is a map. We'll go into some of the criteria within this map in just a second, but just wanted to give East Lower Village a little shout out about why it kind of fits in with multiple needs of the town and the goals of 3A. So we're seeing that this had a high rating amongst the community surveys and forums and had support from other town boards and committees. This district, kind of by its name, is near Lower Village. It's east of it specifically, and this can help bring in, if it does get developed in the future, some more residents and people to support those businesses in Lower Village. This district also encourages infill development, which would help foster our sustainability goals. And those infill development is basically if there's little gaps between houses, you could build a small building between them so that you're maintaining the existing dwellings, but kind of filling in just the gaps in the space that could be utilized for something else. The East Lower Village District is located near some recreation facilities, some conservation areas, and it also has some close by connections to pedestrian and cyclist facilities. This area avoids some agriculture land and some of the land that has kind of those quintessential historic and rural views that were identified in the open space and recreation plan that was recently updated by the conservation and recreation departments. And it's also avoiding that non-residential land so that we can keep businesses in those areas and encourage businesses to be there. This district is primarily along Great Road. So it has pretty good access in and out of Stow, so that we can have those regional connections. This area is about 12.42 acres of land that is considered compliant. So that takes out some of the wetlands and other factors that the state set. So I will take us through a quick overview of the different layers within this map. So now the map is a little bit larger on our screen, and it took away a lot of that color. So to the left side, you can see the lower village cemetery and a large pond that's behind it. Might recall seeing that as you're driving towards Maynard along Great Road. So as you can see right now, there's a lot of just blank space on this map. Some of the roads are identified. So now we'll overlay the East Lower Village District. So that's that orangey red color that you see. And it includes multiple parcels along Great Road. The area underneath some of those water bodies that were in blue are also included in that district, but they won't be counted towards our district minimum size. On here, we identify the parcels that are touching the district. They're highlighted in that bluish color. And you'll notice that there are about 3 parcels that are not fully within the zone. We call that split zoning, where part of the property is in one zone and then in another zone. And the intent of this was really because of the amount of excluded land that the town has in those parcels. So the excluded land in this case is mostly wetlands and proximity to water bodies. And that is not considered to be buildable in Stow or by the state. So we really included some of those parcels just to connect some of the larger developable areas together. Guess, Valerie, if you could launch our next survey question. We just want to know quickly, what are some initial thoughts on the East Lower Village District? Are you in favor of it, a little unsure, not a fan of it, or don't have an opinion yet? So I'll give this a little bit of time so that people can respond, and we'll see how this goes. Just a few more seconds. Right, so it looks like the results are starting to be shared. It seems like overall we like this kind of vibe. Some people don't yet have an opinion, but that's perfectly fine because we'll be adding in a little bit more detail about what we're proposing initially on this. So thank you all for providing your input, and we can move on to some of the draft zoning components. So taking in all of the feedback, the planning board kind of went through some of the types of housing that the town would be okay with seeing if, these parcels get developed in some way. So they identified new types of housing that would be allowed, and this includes duplex, triplex, townhouse, and then the conversion of a single family dwelling to a duplex or triplex. So as I said, these are new ones that are allowed within the district because they're currently not allowed on those parcels at the moment. And I just want to note that these are types of housing that are in addition to the existing types of housing that are allowed. Right now, it's just single family dwellings and single family dwellings with an accessory apartment, and those would be continued to be allowed within that district. So I mentioned duplex, triplex, and townhouse, but what do those kind of look like? So on this slide, we identify those. So we have duplexes on the left, triplexes in the middle, and townhouses on the right. So our duplexes are 2-unit buildings. So it could be one housing unit on top of another. They could be stacked side to side, front to back, in some different um, configuration. But with duplexes, the thing to remember is that there are 2 units within that one building. Triplexes are very similar to duplexes, except instead of having 2 units, they have 3. So we have 2 images there that show kind of different configurations of what a triplex could look like. And then on the right, we have townhouses, and these are basically single family homes that are all kind of squished together in a row. And the planning board kind of thought about how many would we want to allow in one row. And the number that was kind of agreed upon to share out with the community for feedback was 5 units, kind of in one row maximum. So Valerie is going to launch another poll question. And are there any types of housing that we missed that you would want to see included? Or are these kind of consistent with what you were hoping multifamily housing in Stowe would look like? These are some long questions, so we'll give you just a little bit of time to fill this out. All right, just a few more seconds. All right, I guess we can end the poll. And it looks like so far we're hitting the mark of kind of the community seems to be liking what was proposed so far, but there's also some interest in some other types that we didn't quite call out. So just good things to see. And there was a few that didn't necessarily like what we did, but we're going to work on trying to make the best zoning that we can. All right. So some other components that the planning board would like to share out is that we would like to have this district allow 15 units per acre at a maximum. That would allow us to comply with the state and stay within that compliant threshold under the law. The planning board also would like to propose having buildings that are 2.5 stories in height. This would be 2 main levels or 2 living levels plus a finished attic space. So almost 3 stories, but not quite. So we have a poll question about that. Do you have any thoughts about the height of buildings? Is it great? Do we want a little bit shorter? Do we want a little taller? Is there something else you want to share? Just a few more seconds. We can close the poll. Right. So it looks like a lot of people are supportive of the 2.5 stories. There's a few that don't like it, a few that want it a little bit taller, and then there's some people who aren't quite sure yet, and that's okay. I guess right now, just to share kind of about Stowe zoning right now, we allow 3 stories in as a maximum height, so this is a little bit shorter. I'm not sure if that would change anyone's opinion or if it might keep it as is. Right. The next part that we would like to share out is that the parking minimums for each dwelling unit will remain the same as what's currently allowed in the zoning. So the current zoning allows for two, or requires two parking spaces per one dwelling unit. So I think of it as each house has two parking spaces at a minimum. Is that something that the community wants to see more of, less of? Valerie will launch the next poll so that you can kind of share out if you'd like to see more or less parking, or keep it as proposed. Just a few more seconds. Looks like a lot of answers just came in. Right, looks like we can close and share the results out. Um, Seems like the majority agreed with the parking requirements, and then there's a few that are would like a little bit more or a little less. But that's perfectly fine. I think continue on, and we'll talk a little bit about the affordability requirements that the planning board is looking for. Um, Under 3A, the town can require a developer, if they were doing a project, to construct affordable housing units. Those would be the deed restricted ones that are eligible to households that are making less than the median income. So we can't quite say the percentage of deed restricted affordable units that we might require, or the percentage of a development that would have to be deed restricted. But we wanted to share out that the planning board has expressed interest and is currently undertaking an economic feasibility study to see if we can get that 10% a little bit higher. And that would help keep us in line with the affordable housing targets that the state sets, as those affordable units would be counted on the town's subsidized housing inventory. You might have heard of that 10% goal that the towns all have of reaching, and this could be one way that we could help increase that number. All right, we now have a little activity, and I will pass the baton over to Valerie to take us through.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Okay, so we have we'll do an activity here where we'll provide questions and have you write in your responses, your answers to those. So bear with me while I try to pull this up. So we're using Zoom's whiteboard feature. Okay. Great. So hopefully you are all seeing this. So to just introduce you a little bit to this, pretend like this is a bulletin board and you're at one of our physical in-person forums. So we have a question that will kind of appear in this top center area, and you're able to provide feedback on these Post-it notes that you can move around. You can insert texts anywhere you want. You can use this cursor to click over here and say, if you're trying to respond to this prompt, what primary questions are you left with after tonight's presentation? You could say, I would like more information. That's not very specific, but sorry, somehow. Okay, it's crashing. It's great start, great start. So you can add your feedback here. You can comment by pressing this button on the left for comment. You can say something about someone else's note. You can feel free to add in a sticker to say, yes, I would also like more information. So we'll hang out at this whiteboard for just a few moments while we kind of gather questions from you all, and then I'll take you through a couple other pages. I know it's after 8, so if you do need to head out, you can navigate yourself through these additional 4 pages or 3 pages that we have of questions. So don't know if is this crashing for all of you too? No. Great. Excellent. Um, so feel free to start writing in your questions, and we'll attempt to answer them to the best of our ability. So feel free to go in. If this is not working for you, you can also feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom on the bottom menu of your screen. Okay. So are you trying to only zone one piece of land? So we are look based on the survey results that we received and comments on a forum recently. We are looking at zoning only one district. The district itself will have has multiple parcels within it. So it's the one East Lower Village district that Michael had shown earlier. Um, So Michael, this is kind of crashing for me every once in a while, so you might need to to see if you can pick any of these up while I can't see them. Um,
Seems like
oh,
people are typing, so I'll just kind of let them
okay.
finish.
I'll answer this one. So how many units would a developer need to build to make it economically feasible for them to create public water and sewer? That's a great question. So anecdotally, the development community generally avoids wastewater treatment or public water supplies unless project numbers are at about 100 to 150 units or 200 to 300 bedrooms. So we are not expecting to get to that cap, particularly as the district is multiple different parcels. So someone would need to likely own the full district themselves in order to create a project that's large enough to have the space to put in a public water supply well. So it's a space issue and it's also that economic feasibility. So that's why those larger 40B projects are the ones that have the public water in them. And feel free to follow up if I'm not answering all of your question.
One question says, could someone build a second unit on their parcel that already has a single family home? The answer to that is based on kind of that preliminary zoning that we're thinking of. That would be an allowed thing. So they could build, they could do an accessory apartment, which is something that's currently under the zoning bylaw as an allowed use, or they could build a secondary home. We're not limiting the number of buildings on a site, but that would be an allowed use.
So there are also a couple questions here about the impacted property owners. So this person who answered no, we have not spoken to the abutters in East Lower Village. That's somewhat true, right? So we've there is a resident on the call here that he and I are emailing, trying to find some time to chat. But because the planning board only selected their preferred location last week, we have not had the opportunity to have meetings with the neighbors. So we should be upfront about that. Before, when we had 3 different districts up for consideration, we felt like that was too early in the process to begin to have those discussions. So now is the time to have those meetings with the abutters while they can still influence the final location and the final zoning. So this is not intended to go to town meeting in May. So it's not as though we only have a couple months here. We're eyeing a fall town meeting, and certainly we'll try to take our time with making sure that we are addressing abutters' concerns. So would there be the allowance of single bedroom or studio apartments that would be attractive to young couples or singles who might not need a family-sized space? We're not able to control the number of bedrooms in these projects. So while a developer may choose to offer studio apartments or single bedroom apartments, that's not something that we can require, unfortunately. So this question is, does this mean that one parcel that is within the zone can build a multi-unit structure as long as the density is 15 units per acre? So someone could construct a building at a lesser density. So it could be it could be at 8 units an acre, it could be at 2 units an acre. What we do have control over is the type of structure. So a follow-up question to this post-it would be, how many units are in this multi-unit structure? So right now, as Michael had presented, the board is only looking at duplexes, triplexes, and then townhomes up to 5 units. So the question really is, for the parcel that you're looking to develop, your maximum density would be 15 units an acre, though you can do anything lower than that as well. There are a couple questions here about different types of things we could potentially add into the zoning that I want to look up before I answer. So one is, can we put any requirements to protect mature trees? My hesitance in saying yes or no is that we're not able to make the zoning more burdensome than typical residential development, and we don't typically have when it's just single family home development, we don't have a tree protection bylaw. So my gut is that we wouldn't be able to place that restriction on it, but it's a great idea and something that we can consider townwide. And then there's also setback requirements. Yes, we are looking into what the setback requirements could be, which could potentially offer some landscape buffer, although, as the majority of people on this call are single family homeowners, you know that you're able to clear lands that you own. So it's not necessarily a landscape benefit.
See
And then
something about the vet office. I don't know if that was covered yet, but um, with this rezoning effort, we won't necessarily be losing any businesses because we're giving property owners the right to do additional things on their land. We're not taking away any of the existing rights and we're not displacing anyone. It would be up to the property owner themselves if they would want to, continue using that vet office as a vet office, or if they would want to convert to residential, they would have that right to do so. So we don't necessarily see much development pressure to redevelop the vet office, seeing it is a very successful business at the moment, but we're just giving them additional options if something were to change in the future.
so this one is, if a developer is told that some of the land is actually wetland, somehow it's undevelopable, will the state say we need to designate other acreage to get us to the minimum? So this Yes, the state would say this, but this would happen far sooner than getting to a developer. So we're working with consultants to take a look at the East Lower Village district to understand if how much land there is what they call compliant. So wetland does not count toward our minimum compliance. So we're working with a consultant to make sure that the district size that we have includes enough upland area to remain compliant. So that it may mean that some areas of the district are not developable. But as long as we have enough developable land, it's okay. This one's interesting. So given the many undeveloped parcels in town, why would you select parcels that are already developed? This was part of our discussion with the board about what our location considerations should be. So really wanting to maximize benefits to Stow. So making sure that that a new neighborhood could be located in a more walkable part of town that could directly benefit businesses and services in Stow. Um, so this is also a bit of like housing mixed with conservation policy, right? So trying to avoid undeveloped parcels to allow them to remain green space while avoiding suburban sprawl development by adding on, by allowing incremental housing or incremental density to areas of town that are already developed. Um, so the idea here is that we're adding more homes to where homes already are, rather than adding homes to land that is green space right now. Um, I'm seeing the being skeptical of the argument that this is net positive on the tax base. This will bring traffic, calls for sidewalks, need for more services, city people who want city services. You can make fiscal impact studies say anything you want based on what you include as cost impacts. I would just say that you should feel free to go take a look at the fiscal impact assessments that we have available on our website. Um, and I'm also just happy to talk more with you if that person wants to reach out to discuss more about municipal impacts and what was assessed in those studies that we've seen. Okay. So it looks like this is slowing down a little bit. Um, want to be,
There is
um,
one, Valerie, asking
yeah.
about setbacks. The blue one in the center. Um, the one that says I'm worried that development will adversely affect the pond in Stowe.
Oh,
And can setbacks be required that are meaningful?
um, so we would, because we're not able to be, uh, again, more burdensome than a typical single family home development, we would look to the Conservation Commission on that one. So we would, again, any future development that would come through this bylaw would have to be permitted through the Conservation Commission if it's within their jurisdiction. So all of those protections are still in place. Okay. So feel free to keep adding in comments here. I'm going to go to the next page. So let me know if you all can see this at the top of your screen. So it says, sorry, what additional features do you feel are important in future multifamily housing? Do you see that question at the top? So what else could we add into our zoning that would be appreciated?
So for the people who can't see it, I saw a few nods saying that they can't. At
Oh.
the top left corner of your screen, you'll see there's usually three buttons. It'll look like a cloud, and then there's one that looks like two rectangles with a number. If you click on that one, we're on page 2. And one way to help make sure to find it is if it says that you're following Valerie, that'll make sure that you are staying with the main discussion that we're having.
Right. So seeing a couple things that relate to kind of this neighborhood feeling. So walking paths to get to common areas without having to walk in the road or driving a few yards. Absolutely. That's a great one. I wonder how we could maybe work that into some site plan review. Um, Sidewalks, housing closer to the road to give more of a neighborhood feeling. That's great. We were just talking about setback requirements, so maybe, yeah, maybe there is something more about housing closer to the road. Trying to look up Sugar Road in Bolton. I'm not I'm not sure. Oh, I see this one. That project on Sugar Road in Bolton is also a 40B. So again, it's not really the best comparison because it's just a very different scale, and 25% of units at least have to be affordable. But I can look it up if Michael wants to walk through what's on the whiteboard.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm seeing the need for kind of creating that neighborhood feel. A lot of these talk about um, just the transportation component. And that's definitely a consideration that we're thinking about and seeing how we can best um, create the zoning to kind of foster those goals and kind of make it a better product for everyone. Um, Talking about some setbacks and some kind of reserving land for some of the wildlife in the area. Those are things that we can regulate kind of through our open space requirements and some of the setbacks that Valerie mentioned earlier that we're going to be working with our consultant to see kind of how we can best maximize um, those setbacks to kind of continue those values of Stow, but also be compliant with the zoning. Some proximity to the commuter rail, and that's definitely um, something that we've considered. Interior courtyards, that's an architectural feature that I don't know if we've talked about yet with the planning board, but those are definitely something for some of the larger developments, having that shared common space between the units. And that could look like many different things, especially it doesn't have to be fully enclosed if it be like a townhouse development, but shared community space for the residents is something I think a lot of us value.
So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer on the Sugar Road development. It's about 5 different parcels, so it's kind of hard to tell because some parcels are simply for the public water supply. So yeah, it's hard to compare. It's really hard to compare these projects. So
We're seeing what are the impact on traffic, kind of going back to the previous whiteboard of 139 units. So this one, traffic impacts is very um, challenging to predict, especially when we don't necessarily have a product that we're reviewing against. We can use um, uh, other planning initiatives that we've done in the past to kind of predict it, but this is a question that would be very hard to answer when we don't have a proposal in front of us. Generally, if we are creating a denser housing development, the amount of car trips daily produced by a multifamily development compared to a single family development is far less. But of course, there are a lot of factors that go into that, as well as other factors that are external to this area, such as if there is more development in Lower Village, if there is more development in neighboring towns, if there is, other development within Stow. A lot of these factors influence the traffic impact, but it is something that we'll be considering as we move forward.
I'd also I'd also add that this wouldn't be development all at once, right?
Mhm.
So part of the reason for selecting a district that has multiple smaller lots in it rather than one big lot is that we're expecting any development to be much more incremental. And then I'd also say that the 139 units is related to kind of that maximum build of the district. So again, knowing that because we're on private water and sewer and septic, we likely won't see that 15 units an acre. We can't, as Michael said, we can't really say for sure what the actual number of units will be. It's really up to the property owners within the district itself.
Yeah. There's also no guarantee that any units would get produced under this zoning. We're allowing property owners to continue what they're currently using their property for. So there could be no change. Give this a few more minutes, or I think the comments that we're getting in are starting to slow down, but I see one that is coming up that someone's working on.
Yeah, this one's interesting. I think this is an interesting idea for allowing maybe a different type of housing um, housing type. Sorry, that's redundant. Within the district. So it's potentially possible that having more units within the same building, could potentially create more affordable units themselves. Though that is something that's very hard for us to dictate. We really, with the way this law is set out, we really have to let the market kind of dictate a lot of it.
Should we move on to the next whiteboard?
Sure.
Great.
All right, let's go to number 3. So what is the top priority you would like to see included in the zoning? So, when we think about maybe writing in some zoning trade-offs in here, if some conditions for developers, what kinds of things do you want us to have in mind? The location itself, the location within a parcel, how the building is sited, maybe, green space, any equity initiatives you can think of. Um, from the other questions we had, it seemed like there are considerations around trails, walking paths, open space, kind of the same thing we hear from residents about other styles of housing development. So that makes sense.
I see a few that are about avoiding development on open lands and farms and developments to preserve green space. Some more keeping our agricultural land.
A lot of like make it fit in with Stow. Make sure that the same kinds of housing features that we request or require in other types of housing developments are also seen here. So, you know, there are definitely limitations on how much we can require, but we'll are kind of getting that message that as much as we can protect open space, provide setbacks to existing residents, other land uses, protect existing fields, working lands.
Looks like a lot of the comments, people are agreeing with each other, which we love seeing. So some consensus on them.
We'll make this one a little bigger for me.
Make the entrance for cars be better than the one for plantations. So I think that's the private road, Johnson Way, that goes into Plantation Apartments, also now known as Elizabeth Brook Apartments. But yes, we can certainly look into how we can make sure that there is adequate egress in and out of the properties that get developed if they get developed. Minimizing impacts on abutters, great idea.
Yeah, this is really helpful.
Mhm.
Um, I'm seeing us slow down a little bit. I've got an eye on the time. I'm going to go forward to the next and last question, which I hope you find fun. Um, so this is kind of a storytelling opportunity. So, do you have a story about a time when you or someone close to you, or maybe a local business that you know of, has been impacted by a lack of housing options? Do you have a story of living with parents after college, or having your child's friends have to move in with you, or kids moving back in? Um, yeah, perpetually understaffed cafe around town. So thinking about all of all of the service businesses, the restaurants, the cafes, the Dunkin' Donuts in Stow and around the area, everyone who works there has to live somewhere. So are we providing that housing? I'm gonna call on you, Nancy, just while people are writing their own stories. So are you having multiple children move back in soon? Sorry, I cold called you.
Yes, I have 8 weeks until
Yeah.
4 kids are back from college and all living in here. Two athletic boys in their 10 by 10 little bedroom in their bunk beds from center school. And it's not going to be great. Um, but we'll survive. And we have parking for 7 vehicles going to happen now. So, yes, other options would be great. But that's a bigger story because I don't know how you get a new job and pay student loans and have an apartment. That's beyond our solutions here.
Thank you, though.
But yeah, I know many of their peers are coming back and living at home.
Hmm.
But I do know of another one whose mom is in assisted living and has to go in for cancer treatment, and they are looking to find someplace in Stowe so she can live there and they be her caretakers. Um, and so that's what they're really trying to do, and I don't know what they're going to find.
Hmm. This one says, when we started a company in Arlington, employees came from the surrounding towns. When we moved to Burlington, the employees had to buy houses in New Hampshire where they could afford to buy. And over the years, they had to go farther north into New Hampshire.
Mhm. I know a lot of people that are now buying in New Hampshire and commuting
Yeah.
into Boston just
Mhm.
because of the prices. I mean, I have a 40-minute commute into Stowe, so living a little closer would be nice.
Another person shared that they bought a home in Stowe a few years ago after 20 years living in apartments. I wanted to live somewhere with space, animals, trees, etc. Again, similar to where I lived when I was a child. It would have been nice to have the option to move to a town like Stowe when I was younger, before I was finally able to afford a single family home. Initiatives like this can lead to others having that option. I did not. Another story here. I'm 27 years old and single and living with my parents while working full time in Boston because I can't afford a one-bedroom apartment. Also, I have to own a car, even though both my parents also have one, because I can't go to shops or restaurants or get to work without one. Yeah.
And also, back in the day, our call firefighters and highway department employees all lived in town, and now they're coming in from all over Central Mass for their jobs here. And I'm sure part of that is housing.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna close out of this. I know there's one more person writing in. Um, but we do have just two more slides to share. I'll just let this person finish. I don't want to cut you off. Hmm. No longer have starter homes, just McMansions. Yeah. Yeah, they say the average home in Stowe has at least 3 to 4 bedrooms, so it's a large space.
I if I share the screen, it'll turn off the whiteboard. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. And
Oof,
all right.
housing prices out of Winchester. Okay. All right.
So,
So our next steps. So from here, we'll take a look through the comments that we've heard and look back at our draft zoning components. We're also going to keep working with our consultants just to make sure that the zoning district complies or understand how it complies, and meet with the property owners to better understand how we could alter the zoning, make adjustments, or consider new proposals to better suit needs. So through the spring and the summer, we're going to continue refining all of this. Our goal is to be able to have or to be able to meet the deadlines to have a fall special town meeting. September, might be the earliest that we could do. But the goal is to have town meeting vote in our compliant 3A district by the end of the year, which is our deadline in Stow. Next slide. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Just reach out to us directly. We also continue to add resources and information to the planning board's website. If you just go to the planning board and then on the left column, MBTA communities, we're pretty consistently adding updates about what our work is and refreshing our resources page. So there's more on there. But again, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to chat more about this. So thank you all so much for your time tonight. I know this has been a bit of a longer forum, but we really appreciate your time tonight. So thank you for the feedback, and we'll be in touch. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.